The biting wind tore at the worn fabric of her cloak, a cruel hand pushing her deeper into the unforgiving embrace of the mountains. Alara stumbled over loose scree, each step a battle against exhaustion and the gnawing fear that had been her constant companion since she'd fled the valley. Below, the world she had known, the world that had sought to break her, to cage her spirit within the confines of duty and cruelty, felt impossibly distant, yet its shadow stretched long across the snow-dusted peaks. Her breath came in ragged gasps, misting in the frigid air, a visible sign of her desperation. She clutched the meager bundle of belongings tighter, her knuckles white, the cold seeping into her bones despite the frantic effort of her climb. They would come after her. She knew this with a terrible certainty. The thought spurred a fresh wave of panic, sharp and cold as the mountain air. Marriage to a man like him, a man who saw women as property, was a fate she could not accept, not after witnessing her mother's quiet despair. Better to face the mountain's wrath, the unknown terrors of the wild, than the calculated cruelty of a gilded cage. Days blurred into a desperate struggle for survival. Hunger was a dull ache, thirst a burning urgency. She sought shelter in rocky overhangs, huddled against the cold, the wind a mournful symphony of her isolation. Fear whispered constantly in her ear, a serpentine voice telling her she was foolish, weak, that she would surely perish alone. And then she saw the smoke, a thin plume curling against the stark blue of the sky, promising warmth, promising human presence. Her heart leaped, then plummeted. Human presence could be salvation, or it could be a different kind of danger, perhaps even the danger she fled. Hesitantly, driven by the primal need for warmth and sustenance, she followed the sign, her movements cautious, eyes scanning the desolate landscape. It led her to a small, crude cabin tucked into a sheltered hollow, built from rough-hewn logs, blending almost seamlessly with the mountain. And beside it, a man. He was tall and broad, his movements deliberate and strong as he worked with an axe, splitting wood. His clothes were practical, worn, blending into the muted colors of the wilderness. A thick beard covered the lower half of his face, and his eyes, when he finally looked up and saw her standing frozen at the edge of the clearing, were sharp and assessing, like the eyes of a predator. He did not speak. He simply watched her, axe still in hand, a silent, imposing figure etched against the backdrop of the indifferent mountain. In his stillness, there was a power that both intimidated and, strangely, quieted her racing heart. He was not like the men of the valley, with their pretense and their polished cruelty. He was raw, untamed, a part of the landscape itself. Her carefully constructed composure threatened to shatter. Should she speak, plead, run? Her legs felt rooted to the frozen ground. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions and raw vulnerability. She was utterly at his mercy, a fragile bird blown off course into the path of a hawk. The wind howled, swirling snow around her ankles, a reminder of the merciless world outside the small circle of his awareness. He lowered the axe slowly, resting the head on the snow. His gaze remained fixed on her face, searching. In that moment, standing before this silent, solitary man in the heart of the wilderness, Alara felt the true weight of her gamble, the terrifying precipice between death and a desperate, uncertain chance at life. He continued to watch her for a long moment, his expression unreadable beneath the thick beard and hood of his rough coat. He did not move towards her, did not offer a greeting. It was a patience born of the wild, a stillness that spoke of keen observation and a deep understanding of the rhythms of this harsh place. Alara swallowed, her throat dry. She felt exposed, vulnerable, every detail of her weariness, her fear, her desperate hope laid bare under his steady gaze. Finally, he turned without a word and walked towards the cabin. He didn't beckon, didn't dismiss. He simply left the choice to her. Stay and freeze, or follow the silent invitation of warmth. It was not a difficult choice. Her legs, stiff with cold and exhaustion, carried her forward, across the snow, towards the rough-hewn door he held open. Inside, the cabin was small but surprisingly warm, dominated by a stone hearth where a fire crackled merrily. The air smelled of wood smoke, dried herbs, and something wild and earthy. It was a Spartan existence, a rough cot, a table, shelves lined with jars and tools, but it was clean, orderly. A stark contrast to the chaos raging within her. He closed the door, shutting out the wind's howl, the silence inside thick and heavy. He still hadn't spoken. He simply gestured towards a stool near the fire, then turned back to banking the flames. Alara sank onto the stool, her muscles protesting, letting the heat soak into her frozen limbs. She watched him, a silent study in resilience. His movements were economical, purposeful. He seemed a part of this place, as rooted and enduring as the ancient pines outside. He prepared a simple meal stew heated over the fire, thick bread. He set a bowl before her without a word, then took his own, sitting across the small table. Eating under his silent scrutiny was unnerving, yet the food was the most welcome thing she had tasted in days. It was sustenance, survival. When she finished, he took the bowl, cleaned it meticulously with snow and a rough cloth. Still silence. The lack of questions was perhaps the most unsettling thing of all. Did he not care? Or did he simply understand that words were unnecessary? She felt a tremor run through her, the delayed reaction to the terror she had endured. He glanced up, his eyes, the color of deep moss, resting on her face. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw something flicker there, not pity, but perhaps a flicker of understanding, of recognition. He rose and indicated the cot. Rest. It was the first word he had spoken. Deep, resonant, like the rumble of distant thunder. It was not a command, not a request, but a simple statement, an offering of respite. Alara nodded, unable to voice her gratitude. She lay on the cot, wrapped in a rough blanket he provided. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by the sounds of the fire, the wind, and his quiet movements in the cabin. She woke often, her hand instinctively going to the small knife hidden in her bundle, her heart pounding with residual fear. Each time, she saw him sitting by the fire, sharpening a tool, or simply staring into the flames, a sentinel against the dark. He was a man of the mountain, solitary and strong, offering her a sanctuary she had not dared to hope for, asking for nothing in return. Days turned into a week, then two. Alara found a fragile rhythm in the silent routine of the cabin. She learned his name was Silas. He used it sparingly only when necessary. His conversation was as sparse as the mountain landscape, limited to practicalities, the weather, tracking game, the needs of the cabin. Yet, in his silence, she learned more about him than she had from the garrulous men of the valley. She watched how he cared for his tools, how he read the signs in the snow, how his eyes constantly scanned the perimeter. He was a guardian of his small domain, and by extension, he was her guardian. She began to help, tentatively at first, then with more purpose. Gathering wood, fetching water from the frozen stream, mending torn clothes. Her hands, once accustomed only to needlepoint and piano keys, grew calloused and strong. With each task, she felt a flicker of her own strength returning, a quiet defiance of the weakness that had threatened to consume her. He didn't comment on her help, but she saw the subtle shifts, a nod of acknowledgement, a slight easing in the perpetual tension of his shoulders. One evening, as she struggled with a stubborn knot in a rope, he knelt beside her, his large hands gentle yet firm as he showed her the trick. Their fingers brushed, and a jolt went through her, unexpected and warm. He withdrew his hand quickly, his gaze meeting hers for a brief moment before he looked away. But something had passed between them in that touch, a recognition of shared humanity in their isolated world. Her internal monologue began to shift. The constant fear was still there, a dull hum beneath the surface, but it was now mixed with a growing sense of security, a quiet fascination with this enigmatic man, and a budding sense of self-reliance. She was no longer just a fugitive. She was a survivor, adapting, learning. The world outside the cabin remained a threat. Silas was acutely aware of it. She saw it in the way he stopped at the edge of the clearing, listening intently before chopping wood. She saw it in the extra care he took to cover their tracks after a hunting trip. He never spoke of who might be following her, but his actions spoke volumes. One afternoon, while returning from the stream, she heard it, the distant baying of hounds. Her blood ran cold. They had found her. Panic seized her, visceral and consuming, rooting her to the spot. Silas emerged from the cabin, his eyes instantly locking onto hers. He didn't need her to speak. He saw the terror on her face, heard the faint, terrible sound. In an instant, his stoicism vanished, replaced by a focused intensity that was terrifying and reassuring all at once. He moved swiftly, silently. Inside, quickly, his voice was low, urgent. He ushered her into the cabin, grabbing his rifle from above the hearth. The hounds grew closer, their cries echoing through the valley, a dreadful symphony of pursuit. Alara stood trembling by the small window, watching Silas. He didn't hide. He stood near the cabin entrance, rifle held ready, a formidable figure waiting for the inevitable confrontation. They were coming. The past she had fled was catching up, brought by the men determined to drag her back to the life she had refused. But now she was not alone. She had Silas, the silent mountain man who had offered her sanctuary, and in doing so had become her unexpected protector. The first figures emerged from the trees, men on horseback, led by the cruel, sneering face of her intended husband. He saw her standing at the window and a triumphant grin spread across his face, ugly and possessive. Behind him were several hired hands, armed and grim. They dismounted, advancing towards the cabin, the hounds baying around their legs. The air crackled with tension. "Alara!" her pursuer called out, his voice echoing. "Come out now, and we'll forget this foolishness." Silas didn't move, didn't speak. He was a statue of defiance. The lead man took another step, raising a hand as if to command. Silas raised his rifle. The sound of the shot was deafening in the mountain silence. It didn't hit the man, but struck the snow inches from his feet, sending up a geyser of white. The pursuers halted abruptly, startled. The grin vanished from the lead man's face, replaced by fury. "You fool! You interfere with what is mine!" he roared, drawing a pistol. Silas remained still, the rifle barrel steady. "She is not yours," Silas said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority, cutting through the tension like a blade. It was more words than she had heard him string together in weeks. The confrontation hung in the air, the valley echoing with the sounds of the hounds and the ragged breathing of the men. Alara watched from the window, her heart pounding, but the paralyzing fear had lessened, replaced by a fierce determination. She would not go back. Seeing Silas stand against them, seeing his quiet strength, ignited something within her. She looked around the cabin, her eyes landing on Silas's hunting knife, left on the table. Without hesitation, she picked it up, the weight of it solid and reassuring in her hand. She moved to stand beside Silas, just inside the doorway, the knife held ready. Her presence was not an act of aggression, but of solidarity, of choosing her ground. Her intended husband's eyes widened slightly as he saw her, saw the knife, saw the change in her. She was no longer the cowering girl he had expected. Silas glanced at her, a brief, almost imperceptible moment of acknowledgement passing between them. He didn't tell her to go back. He accepted her stand. The lead man, sensing the shift, hesitated. He had expected easy prey, a simple retrieval. He had not expected resistance, and certainly not from the woman herself, standing beside the formidable mountain man. The wind picked up, swirling snow around them, blurring the edges of the confrontation. The pursuers exchanged uneasy glances. They were in the mountain man's domain now, far from the easy control of the valley. After another tense moment, the lead man lowered his pistol slowly. "This isn't over," he snarled, but the conviction had left his voice. He turned, gesturing to his men, and they retreated, mounting their horses, calling off the hounds with frustrated curses. The sounds of their departure faded into the wind, leaving behind a profound silence. Silas lowered his rifle, his gaze following the retreating figures until they were swallowed by the trees. He turned to look at Elara. She still held the knife, her knuckles white, but her stance was firm. Her eyes met his, and in their depths, he saw not just gratitude, but a newfound strength, a resilience that mirrored his own. He didn't praise her, didn't make a fuss. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "They won't return soon," he said, his voice back to its usual quiet resonance. "Not to this place." The danger had passed for now. The silence in the cabin afterwards was different. It was no longer heavy with unspoken questions or tentative observation, but filled with a quiet understanding, a shared victory. Elara put the knife back, her hands trembling slightly now that the immediate threat was gone, but her spirit was steady. She had faced her past, and she had not been broken. She had found refuge not just in a place, but in the quiet strength of another soul. In the heart of the rugged mountain, amidst the unforgiving landscape and the biting wind, Elara had sought refuge and found something more profound. She had found Silas, a man as raw and true as the wilderness itself, and in his quiet strength, she had rediscovered her own. The journey had stripped her bare, revealing the core of her being, the resilience that lay hidden beneath years of societal constraint. She had fled oppression and, in doing so, had run towards her own liberation. The path ahead was uncertain, marked by the wild beauty and inherent dangers of the mountain. But she was no longer the fearful, vulnerable woman who had stumbled onto Silas's clearing. She stood taller, her eyes clear, ready to face whatever came, not just with him, but as herself, forged anew in the crucible of hardship and the quiet comfort found in the heart of the mountain man.